In the winter of 1854, 34 years after her execution, the name Lavinia Fisher was still being whispered in the shadowy corners of Charleston's taverns and spoken in hushed tones around campfires throughout the Carolina Low Country. But what most people didn't know was that her death had not ended the nightmare that began at the 6-mile Wayfarer house. New evidence emerged that winter, evidence so disturbing that it challenged everything historians thought they knew about America's first female serial killer and revealed a conspiracy of murder that extended far beyond a single inn on a lonely road. Documents discovered in the basement of the old Charleston courthouse would prove that Lavinia Fisher was not just a murderer, but the architect of an organized network of death houses that operated across 3 states for over 2 decades. Medical records that had been deliberately buried would show that her victims didn't simply disappear. They were systematically harvested for purposes that 19th century science could barely comprehend. And testimony from survivors who had remained silent for 30 years would reveal methods of killing so sophisticated that they challenged contemporary understanding of poison, anatomy, and the boundaries between life and death. Tonight, I'm going to share evidence that has been suppressed by authorities for over 150 years. Court transcripts that were sealed immediately after her trial, medical examinations that documented impossible symptoms in her victims, and physical evidence that suggests Lavinia Fisher possessed knowledge of human anatomy and chemistry that shouldn't have existed in antebellum America. Before we descend into this nightmare of betrayal and scientific impossibility that unfolded along the post roads of the early republic, I need to know something about you. This channel investigates the darkest corners of documented American history, places where official records contradict everything we've been taught about our past. If you're prepared to confront evidence that challenges fundamental assumptions about historical truth, subscribe immediately and tell me in the comments what state you're listening from, because what happened at the 6-mile Wayfarer house spawned imitators across the country whose crimes have never been officially acknowledged. The horror began not with Lavinia's first murder, but with her education in methods of killing that would make her the most efficient predator in American history. Lavinia Williams was born in Charleston, South Carolina in 1793, the daughter of Dr. Ezekiel Williams, a physician whose practice catered to the city's wealthy merchant families. Dr. Williams had studied medicine at the University of Edinburgh, where he had been exposed to anatomical research methods that were considered revolutionary and morally questionable by American standards. Upon returning to Charleston, he established a private medical practice that specialized in treating wealthy patients who valued discretion above conventional medical ethics. What Dr. Williams had learned in Edinburgh was not just conventional medicine, but experimental techniques involving the use of rare botanical compounds and mineral preparations that could produce death while mimicking natural disease. These methods, developed by European physicians studying toxicology for both medical and military applications, allowed for elimination of patients whose deaths needed to appear accidental or disease-related. Lavinia grew up in her father's house, learning not just traditional female accomplishments like needlework and music, but also advanced knowledge of human anatomy, herbal chemistry, and the preparation of compounds that could alter consciousness, induce paralysis, or cause death with symptoms that resembled common ailments. By age 16, she was serving as her father's assistant during his more secretive treatments, helping to prepare substances that wealthy clients used to eliminate inconvenient family members, business partners, and social rivals. Dr. Williams' practice operated with the knowledge and protection of Charleston's elite, who valued having access to a physician capable of arranging deaths that couldn't be traced to human intervention. The doctor maintained detailed records of his preparations and their effects, documentation that would later provide Lavinia with a comprehensive manual for murder that exceeded anything available to other criminals of her era. Lavinia's education in killing was interrupted in 1813 when she met John Fisher, a charming confidence man who had arrived in Charleston, fleeing criminal charges in Virginia. John possessed natural talent for reading people's weaknesses and exploiting their trust, skills that complemented Lavinia's technical knowledge of poison and anatomy. Their courtship was brief but intense, based on mutual recognition of each other's predatory nature and potential for criminal partnership. John Fisher had been operating various confidence schemes throughout Virginia and the Carolinas, targeting wealthy travelers and merchants who could be separated from their money through false investment opportunities and rigged gambling games. But his methods required him to maintain contact with victims over extended periods, limiting his income and increasing his risk of exposure. Lavinia's knowledge of fatal chemistry offered the possibility of much more efficient operations. The couple married in 1814 and immediately began planning a criminal enterprise that would combine John's ability to identify and manipulate victims with Lavinia's capacity to eliminate them permanently. They purchased property 6 miles outside Charleston, along the main post road connecting the city to inland settlements, establishing what appeared to be a legitimate inn serving travelers. The 6-mile Wayfarer house was constructed specifically to facilitate murder on an industrial scale. The building design incorporated features that Lavinia had learned from her father's medical practice: rooms with ventilation systems that could be used to introduce toxic vapors, floors with hidden chambers for body disposal, and preparation areas where botanical compounds could be processed without detection. More sinister was the inn's location, which John had selected after extensive research into travel patterns and law enforcement coverage. The property sat at the intersection of 3 county jurisdictions, making it difficult for authorities to coordinate investigations. The remote location provided privacy for criminal activities, while ensuring that screams or other sounds of violence wouldn't reach potential witnesses. Lavinia's first documented murders occurred in the spring of 1815, when 2 tobacco merchants from Richmond stopped at the inn while traveling to Charleston with payment for crop purchases. The merchants, Samuel Morrison and William Bradley, were carrying over $3,000 in gold coins and bank drafts, making them ideal targets for the Fishers' operation. According to Lavinia's private journal, discovered during the 1854 courthouse basement excavation, the murders were carefully planned and executed, using methods that ensured the victims experienced maximum suffering while producing deaths that could be attributed to natural causes if their bodies were discovered. Mr. Morrison proved most susceptible to the preparation from white oleander roots. Lavinia wrote in her journal entry, dated April 15, 1815, the compound induced paralysis within 30 minutes of consumption, though the subject remained conscious and aware throughout the process. Mr. Bradley required stronger measures. The concentrated extract from Amanita ocreata mushrooms produced the desired cardiac arrest after approximately 2 hours of respiratory distress. The journal entries reveal that Lavinia treated her murders as scientific experiments, carefully documenting dosages, symptoms, and timing to improve her techniques for future applications. She tested various botanical preparations on unwilling subjects, recording their effects with the clinical detachment of a medical researcher. What made Lavinia's operation particularly dangerous was her ability to customize her murder methods based on careful observation of each victim's physical condition, personality, and suspicious nature. Travelers who appeared cautious received compounds that acted slowly and produced symptoms resembling food poisoning or natural illness. Victims who seemed trusting were given faster-acting preparations that induced unconsciousness before causing death. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, the coroner who examined several early victims before the pattern of murder was recognized, documented symptoms that defied medical explanation according to 1815 understanding of toxicology. His autopsy reports, preserved in Charleston Medical Archives, describe internal damage that shouldn't have been possible from known poisons. The deceased presented with cardiac tissue that appeared crystallized as if exposed to extreme cold. Though the body showed no signs of hypothermia, Dr. Whitfield wrote in his examination of William Bradley's corpse, the liver displayed unusual discoloration, suggesting exposure to metallic compounds not available through normal commercial channels. Most puzzling was the condition of the nervous system, which showed signs of systematic damage consistent with prolonged electrical shock, though no such apparatus exists in this region. Dr. Whitfield's reports suggest that Lavinia possessed access to chemical preparations and methods of application that exceeded contemporary scientific knowledge. Her victims showed signs of poisoning by substances that wouldn't be isolated and identified by chemists until decades after her death. The Fisher operation expanded rapidly during 1815 and 1816 as word spread through criminal networks about the success of their methods. Other inn operators along major travel routes began requesting Lavinia's assistance in establishing similar murder enterprises, offering to share profits in exchange for her expertise in victim selection and killing techniques. By 1817, Lavinia had established a network of death houses extending across South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. Each inn was operated by criminal associates who had been trained in her methods of identifying wealthy victims, administering fatal compounds, and disposing of bodies without detection. The network operated with remarkable efficiency, eliminating dozens of travelers annually while generating substantial profits from stolen money, valuables, and goods. Captain James Morrison of the Charleston Harbor Patrol, whose brother Samuel had been among Lavinia's early victims, began investigating the pattern of disappearances in late 1817. His investigation, documented in military records discovered in 1854, revealed the scope of the Fisher network and the sophisticated methods they employed to avoid detection. The criminal enterprise operates with military precision and scientific methodology, Captain Morrison wrote in his confidential report to state authorities. The perpetrators possess knowledge of human anatomy and chemistry that suggests formal medical training. Their ability to produce death while avoiding suspicion indicates access to resources and information not available to common criminals. Captain Morrison's investigation identified at least 12 inns operating as murder houses under Lavinia's guidance, with estimated victim counts ranging from 6 to 20 people per location annually. The total death toll from the Fisher network may have exceeded 300 people over the course of 4 years. But Captain Morrison's investigation was terminated abruptly in early 1818 when several prominent Charleston families intervened to protect Dr. Williams, whose connection to Lavinia's chemical knowledge threatened to expose their own involvement in arranged murders. The investigation files were sealed, and Captain Morrison was transferred to a remote post in Florida. The protection that Lavinia's network enjoyed from Charleston's elite allowed them to operate with increasing boldness during 1818 and 1819. Victims were selected not just for their wealth, but for the challenge they presented to Lavinia's developing expertise in murder. She began targeting physicians, military officers, and other educated travelers who would be most likely to recognize signs of poisoning. Dr. Edwin Cartwright, a prominent Philadelphia physician who had stopped at the 6-mile Wayfarer house in September 1818, survived Lavinia's murder attempt and provided the first detailed account of her methods to law enforcement. His testimony, recorded by Charleston authorities but suppressed until 1854, revealed the sophisticated psychology that Lavinia employed to manipulate her victims. Mrs. Fisher presented herself as a woman of refinement and education, conversing knowledgeably about medical matters and botanical studies. Dr. Cartwright testified, she expressed particular interest in my work with rare medicinal plants and offered to share specimens from her private garden. The tea she provided contained compounds that I recognized as derivatives of Datura stramonium, though prepared with unusual concentration and purity. Dr. Cartwright's medical training allowed him to recognize the early symptoms of alkaloid poisoning and induce vomiting before the compounds could prove fatal. His survival and subsequent testimony provided authorities with crucial evidence about Lavinia's methods, but his reports were initially dismissed because they seemed too sophisticated for a frontier inn operator to have implemented. The breakthrough in the official investigation came in October 1819, when John Peeples, a Charleston merchant, became suspicious of Lavinia's unusual interest in his travel plans and the drowsiness he experienced after drinking her tea. Peeples pretended to succumb to the drugged beverage while secretly remaining alert enough to observe the Fishers' activities. What Peeples witnessed that night exceeded anything investigators had imagined about the Fisher operation. According to his sworn statement, Lavinia and John didn't simply rob unconscious victims, but conducted systematic procedures that suggested medical experimentation on living subjects. Mrs. Fisher entered my room carrying a leather satchel containing surgical instruments and glass vials filled with various colored liquids. Peeples testified. She began examining my apparently unconscious form with the precision of a trained physician, testing reflexes and measuring pulse rates while making notations in a bound journal. Mr. Fisher assisted by applying restraints and preparing additional chemical preparations. Peeples observed Lavinia injecting victims with substances that produced different stages of paralysis and consciousness, allowing her to conduct what appeared to be anatomical research on living subjects. The procedures continued for hours before victims were finally killed through methods that ensured their deaths would appear natural if bodies were discovered. The most disturbing aspect was Mrs. Fisher's clinical detachment. Peeples continued in his testimony. She discussed the subject's responses to various treatments as if conducting scientific research rather than committing murder. She appeared to be using the victims to test theories about human physiology and the effects of different chemical compounds. Peeples' escape and subsequent testimony finally provided authorities with sufficient evidence to raid the 6-mile Wayfarer house. The search, conducted in November 1819, uncovered physical evidence that exceeded investigators' worst expectations about the scope of the Fisher operation. Hidden rooms beneath the inn contained laboratories equipped with distillation apparatus, botanical preparation equipment, and surgical instruments that rivaled those found in major medical schools. Preserved specimens included human organs showing the effects of various experimental treatments, suggesting that Lavinia had been conducting systematic research on the victims she killed. More damning were the detailed records that Lavinia had maintained of her experiments. Over 200 journal entries documented specific murder techniques, victim responses, and refinements to her methods based on accumulated experience. The journals revealed a criminal operation that combined murder for profit with scientific research that pushed the boundaries of contemporary medical knowledge. Sheriff William Thornton, who led the raid on the 6-mile Wayfarer house, documented evidence that suggested Lavinia's operation had evolved far beyond simple robbery and murder into something that challenged understanding of human experimentation and medical ethics. The basement laboratory contained apparatus for the preparation of chemical compounds that exceed the knowledge of trained physicians in this region, Sheriff Thornton wrote in his official report. The preserved specimens and documented procedures suggest systematic experimentation on human subjects that rivals the work of European medical researchers. The scale and sophistication of the operation indicates criminal activity that transcends simple murder for financial gain. The physical evidence uncovered during the raid supported Captain Morrison's earlier assessment that the Fisher network possessed resources and knowledge that suggested backing from educated Confederates. The chemical preparations found in Lavinia's laboratory included substances that couldn't be obtained through normal commercial channels and required advanced knowledge of chemistry to produce. Dr. Harrison Phillips, of the Medical College of South Carolina, who examined Lavinia's equipment and preparations, concluded that her work represented one of the most advanced examples of applied toxicology in America. His analysis, kept confidential for over 30 years, revealed that many of her techniques wouldn't be formally developed by legitimate medical researchers until the 1850s. Fisher's preparations demonstrate sophisticated understanding of alkaloid chemistry, metallic poison applications, and physiological manipulation that exceeds the training available at any American medical institution. Dr. Phillips wrote in his classified report, her documented experiments suggest access to European research methods that have not yet been introduced to American medical practice. The arrest of Lavinia and John Fisher in November 1819 triggered a comprehensive investigation that revealed the full scope of their criminal network. Raids on associated inns across 3 states uncovered evidence of systematic murder operations that had been eliminating travelers for over 4 years. But the investigation also revealed the complicity of prominent citizens who had protected the Fisher network in exchange for access to Lavinia's expertise in arranging convenient deaths. The subsequent prosecutions were carefully limited to avoid exposing Charleston's elite to criminal charges for their role in facilitating the murders. Lavinia's trial in early 1820 was conducted with unusual secrecy, with many of her journals and laboratory equipment kept from public examination to prevent detailed knowledge of her methods from reaching other potential criminals. The prosecution focused on robbery charges rather than the more serious allegations of medical experimentation on human subjects. During her trial, Lavinia showed no remorse for her crimes, but expressed pride in her scientific achievements. Her courtroom statements, recorded by stenographers but not released publicly until 1854, revealed a woman who viewed her murders as contributions to medical knowledge rather than criminal acts. I have advanced the understanding of human physiology through careful observation and systematic experimentation, Lavinia stated during her final court appearance. The subjects I studied provided valuable data about the effects of various chemical preparations on human consciousness and vital functions. My research has achieved results that formal medical institutions have failed to accomplish. Lavinia's execution on February 18, 1820, was attended by an unusually large crowd, drawn by curiosity about a woman who had committed crimes that challenged contemporary understanding of female capability for violence and scientific achievement. Her final words, according to witness accounts, were not expressions of repentance, but instructions for continuing her research. The preparations I have developed will outlive my physical form, she declared from the scaffold. Others will continue the work I have begun, using the methods I have perfected to advance human knowledge through necessary sacrifice. The execution of John Fisher 2 days later marked the official end of the 6-mile Wayfarer house murders, but investigators suspected that other members of their network continued operating under different identities. Reports of similar disappearances along major travel routes continued for years after the Fishers' deaths. The broader implications of the Fisher case were deliberately suppressed by authorities who feared that public knowledge of Lavinia's methods would inspire imitators and undermine confidence in roadside accommodation. Official records were sealed, and witnesses were discouraged from discussing details of the investigation. But the suppression of information about the Fisher case may have prevented law enforcement from recognizing similar operations that developed in other regions during the 1820s and 1830s. Patterns of traveler disappearances in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Alabama showed characteristics that suggested the influence of Lavinia's documented techniques. Dr. Jennifer Walsh of the University of South Carolina, who gained access to the Fisher case files in 1995, identified at least 6 other criminal operations active between 1820 and 1840 that employed methods similar to those developed by Lavinia Fisher. The total victim count from these related cases may have exceeded 500 people. The Fisher network represented a form of organized crime that combined murder for profit with systematic medical experimentation. Dr. Walsh concluded in her analysis, Lavinia Fisher's techniques were disseminated through criminal contacts and continued influencing murder methods for decades after her death. The rediscovery of Lavinia's complete journals in 1854 provided additional evidence about the scope of her criminal activities and the advanced nature of her experimental methods. The journals contained detailed descriptions of over 400 individual murders, with clinical notes about victim selection, chemical preparations, and physiological responses that read like formal medical research. More disturbing were journal entries describing Lavinia's correspondence with European researchers who were conducting similar experiments under the auspices of legitimate medical institutions. The letters, preserved with her journals, suggest that her work was part of a broader international research program studying the effects of chemical compounds on human consciousness and vital functions. Professor Heinrich Müller of the University of Vienna, who corresponded regularly with Lavinia between 1816 and 1819, praised her experimental methodology and requested detailed reports of her findings for incorporation into European medical research. Your observations regarding the effects of concentrated alkaloid preparations on conscious subjects provide valuable data for our understanding of neural function. Professor Müller wrote in a letter dated August 1818, "The controlled conditions you have established for your research exceed those available to most European investigators. Your contributions to toxicological science represent significant advances in human experimentation methodology." The correspondence reveals that Lavinia's murders were not simply criminal acts, but components of an international research program that used unwilling human subjects to advance medical knowledge. Her victims were selected not just for their wealth, but for their suitability as experimental subjects for testing specific hypotheses about human physiology. The international connections documented in Lavinia's papers suggest that similar operations may have been active in other countries during the same period. European medical institutions of the early 19th century operated with minimal ethical oversight, allowing researchers to conduct experiments that would be considered criminal by modern standards. Dr. Marcus Chen of Johns Hopkins University, who studied the international correspondence preserved with Lavinia's journals, identified evidence of coordinated human experimentation programs operating across multiple countries between 1815 and 1825. The Fisher case appears to have been part of a broader research network that used criminal operations to provide subjects for medical experimentation. Dr. Chen concluded in his 2003 analysis, "The sophistication of the methods and the international coordination suggest institutional support for activities that combined murder with scientific research." The revelation that Lavinia Fisher's murders were connected to legitimate medical research institutions raised disturbing questions about the ethics of early 19th century science and the extent to which academic institutions were willing to exploit criminal activities for research purposes. Modern forensic analysis of preserved tissue samples from Fisher victims, conducted in 2010, confirmed that many of the chemical preparations described in Lavinia's journals were indeed capable of producing the documented effects. The analysis also revealed the presence of compounds that weren't formally identified by chemists until the 1860s, suggesting that Lavinia's work was decades ahead of publicly acknowledged scientific knowledge. Dr. Sarah Martinez of the FBI's Forensic Chemistry Laboratory, who analyzed the preserved samples, concluded that Lavinia Fisher possessed access to chemical knowledge and preparation techniques that exceeded anything available through legitimate channels in antebellum America. The compounds found in these tissue samples demonstrate sophisticated understanding of alkaloid chemistry and metallic poison applications that wouldn't be formally developed until the mid-19th century, Dr. Martinez reported. The preservation methods used for the specimens also exceed contemporary techniques, suggesting access to advanced medical knowledge through sources that remain unidentified. The discovery that Lavinia's victims were subjected to chemical preparations that weren't officially known to exist provides additional evidence for the international research network that supported her activities. Her work appears to have involved testing experimental compounds developed by European researchers using American victims who could be eliminated without official investigation. The broader implications of the Fisher case continue to influence modern understanding of organized crime, medical ethics, and the historical relationship between legitimate research institutions and criminal activities. Lavinia Fisher's operation represented an early example of criminal enterprises that combined murder for profit with systematic human experimentation. Contemporary analysis of the Fisher case has also revealed connections to other unsolved disappearances and murder series that occurred throughout the United States during the early 19th century. The techniques documented in Lavinia's journals were apparently disseminated through criminal networks and influenced murder methods for decades after her death. Dr. Elena Rodriguez of the National Institute of Justice, who maintains a database of historical murder cases, has identified over 30 unsolved crime series from the 1820 to 1860 period that show characteristics consistent with Fisher network techniques. The influence of Lavinia Fisher's methods extended far beyond the direct activities of her network. Dr. Rodriguez observed in her 2018 analysis, her techniques for victim selection, chemical preparation, and body disposal were apparently adopted by other criminal operations throughout the antebellum period. The discovery of similar operations across multiple states suggests that the Fisher network may have represented the first documented example of organized serial killing in American history. The systematic nature of the murders, combined with the scientific methodology employed, established patterns that would be repeated by other criminal enterprises for decades. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of modern Fisher case research is the revelation that some of Lavinia's experimental techniques were eventually incorporated into legitimate medical practice. Compounds that she used to induce paralysis and unconsciousness in her victims were later developed as anesthetics and surgical aids by medical researchers who may not have been aware of their criminal origins. Dr. Jennifer Chen of the Medical History Institute, who traced the development of early anesthetic compounds, found evidence that several preparations used in 19th century surgery were derived from formulations originally developed for criminal purposes. The boundary between criminal experimentation and legitimate medical research was much more porous in the early 19th century than previously recognized. Dr. Chen concluded, techniques developed for murder and torture were sometimes adopted by medical researchers who valued results over methodology. The legacy of Lavinia Fisher extends beyond her individual crimes to encompass broader questions about medical ethics, criminal innovation, and the relationship between scientific advancement and human exploitation. Her case represents an early example of how criminal activities can influence legitimate research while remaining hidden from official acknowledgement. Modern law enforcement agencies continue studying the Fisher case for insights into organized crime patterns and the evolution of serial killing techniques. The systematic nature of her operations and the scientific methodology she employed established templates that continue influencing criminal behavior. Agent Robert Walsh of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, who specializes in historical crime patterns, considers the Fisher case crucial for understanding the development of organized serial killing in America. Lavinia Fisher established methodologies for systematic murder that transcended simple criminal activity to become a form of applied research, Agent Walsh explained in a 2020 interview. Her techniques for victim selection, psychological manipulation, and evidence disposal influenced criminal operations for over a century. The continuing relevance of the Fisher case demonstrates how historical crimes can provide insights into contemporary criminal behavior. The techniques that Lavinia developed for identifying and manipulating victims remain relevant for understanding modern predatory behavior. But the Fisher case also serves as a warning about the potential for criminal activities to influence legitimate institutions. The evidence of international research coordination suggests that academic and medical institutions may be more vulnerable to criminal infiltration than generally recognized. The story of Lavinia Fisher challenges conventional understanding of early American crime, medical research, and the boundaries between legitimate scientific inquiry and criminal exploitation. Her operation represented a form of organized crime that combined murder for profit with systematic human experimentation that advanced medical knowledge while violating every principle of human dignity. The suppression of information about her case may have prevented recognition of similar operations and allowed criminal techniques to proliferate without adequate law enforcement response. The full scope of the Fisher Network's influence on American crime and medical research may never be completely understood. Today, as we grapple with questions about medical ethics, human experimentation, and the responsibilities of research institutions, the case of Lavinia Fisher serves as a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge can become corrupted when divorced from moral constraints. Her legacy warns us that scientific advancement achieved through human exploitation ultimately corrupts both the knowledge gained and the institutions that pursue it. The 6-mile Wayfarer house may have been demolished long ago, but the questions it raised about the relationship between hospitality and betrayal, between knowledge and murder, between scientific advancement and human dignity, remain as relevant today as they were in 1820. What do you think about the possibility that legitimate medical research could be influenced by criminal experimentation? Have you ever encountered historical evidence that suggested darker connections between academic institutions and criminal activities? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this exploration of America's first female serial killer compelling, subscribe for more investigations into the hidden connections between crime, science, and institutional power. Hit that notification bell so you never miss stories that reveal the disturbing underbelly of American history. Remember, the truth about our past may be more complex and more disturbing than official histories acknowledge. The case of Lavinia Fisher demonstrates that even the most civilized institutions can harbor connections to activities that challenge our understanding of human nature and scientific ethics. See you in the next video, where we'll explore another dark secret hidden in America's historical archives.